Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry, and of course, this is my co-host.
My name is Chris Huddleston.
And today we're both very excited to be talking to you about a classic from our childhoods, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Do you have a synopsis for us, Mr. Huddleston?
I do. This was an 1989 film directed by Steven Spielberg, and it stars Harrison Ford and Sean Connery. And the synopsis from IMDb is, in 1938, after his father goes missing while pursuing the Holy Grail, Indiana Jones finds himself up against the Nazis again to stop them from obtaining its powers. The Holy Grail, that is. So, yeah, we've both seen this. So, how long had it been since you had last watched this, Chris, and what were your thoughts this time around?
That's a good question. I don't know that I can tell you precisely the last time I saw it. It's been a minute, but it's not like I haven't seen it since it came out. I do remember when it first came out, feeling a little let down by it. Everybody was like, "Oh, it's so great," and I was kind of like, "Yeah, nothing ever held a candle to that first movie for me." The first Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom kind of changed my life in terms of, me as a moviegoer and cinema enthusiast, and and I think the second one, what would I just say? Temple of Doom, Raiders of the Lost Ark is what I'm talking about. Temple of Doom. Then, we saw that one, which came out a couple years later, and I liked it. It's a very different movie. I end up thinking like, oh, that was different. But I don't think I liked it as much as I liked the original one. And then the third one is a return to form in many ways. It's a sort of an echo of the first one with the addition of Sean Connery, but it's a return to Nazis trying to get a hold of a Christian artifact that has powers that could tip the war and blah, blah, blah. And so I think at the time I felt like it was a little bit of a poor man's Raiders of the Lost Ark, but rewatching it this time, in particular, two performances leapt out of me. I think that Sean Connery's performance is just really lovely. Like he really is going for it. He's playing a little bit against type that I would have thought of the kind of James Bond, hard-boiled egg kind of character that I think we see him do frequently in his career. And he's the sort of academic and father, and I think he hits all those marks in very lovely, understated ways, and I thought that was really a beautiful performance. And the other one was River Phoenix as a young Indiana Jones. And I don't know how much Spielberg was pushing him to do this, or it was just the actor doing his homework or what, but almost every line, every beat is this carefully orchestrated impersonation of not Harrison Ford's voice, because people do, oh, listen, kid. People like Mark Hamill, they do impersonations of Harrison Ford, but it's his mannerisms, it's his acting style, it's expressions he makes, it's his takes on a line that I think is so. I just imagined River Phoenix doing his homework on this part and watching and rewatching old Harrison Ford movies, and with his face and his expressions, he doesn't really. I don't know what Harrison Ford looked like as a kid, but, River Phoenix doesn't sell it on the fact that it was like, wow, it's the spitting image of it. You wouldn't necessarily know, oh, that's Indiana Jones as a kid until you see the performance. And then you can't unsee it. Like, it's just so great. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it too. He's not in the movie much. It's mostly the hook at the beginning. That's pretty much all it is that hook at the beginning, and how the kid Indiana becomes the swashbuckling archaeologist Indiana Jones that we come to love through these series. But I ramble on. What about you revisiting it?
Yeah, a lot of my thoughts are similar. With River Phoenix, one thing that I got to thinking about is he also was in the movie The Mosquito Coast with Harrison Ford. So I'm sure we would have spent a lot of time with him, obviously. So maybe he studied his mannerisms then too, So yeah, my thoughts are pretty similar, and it's interesting because for a lot of people, this is their favorite. And at the time in 1989, so it would have been 16, I guess. I was a little disappointed with this one as well initially because the first two have always been kind of 1A and 1B for me, and I remember being super hyped for this one. I can remember vividly there was a magazine, I don't think it's around anymore, but there was a really good movie magazine back then called Premiere, and they had Spielberg and Harrison Ford and maybe Lucas on the cover that summer, and I remember buying that magazine and everything. And my criticism had always been of this is that it's a little too jokey. It's something that I think of as kind of the law of action franchises. Lethal Weapon and Die Hard do the same thing, where you have Raiders, that is this very serious movie with some funny lines here and there, some funny dialogue. Ass, very dangerous. You go first, and snakes. Why'd it have to be snakes? But there aren't really gags in that movie. You get to the second one and it's more comedic, and then by the time you get to the third, it has kind of full-on gags in it. And watching it, I've definitely warmed to the movie a lot more. It was never like I hated the movie. I just it was always third place for me. And I still think it's third place. But I've seen this movie a bunch of times. Like you say, the River Phoenix opening is fantastic. I love it. And watching it again this time, I had kind of forgotten, but Sean Connery doesn't show up until about an hour into the movie.
Right.
And it's really serious except for, they have the joke where when they're in Venice and he's pounding on where X marks the spot, and you have the guy in the library, hitting at the same time that he's pounding on the ground, the guy stamping the books, and so there's some little jokes like that. But it once Connery shows up and they're tied together and the in the castle and the room's on fire and everything, it gets really jokey for about 30 minutes, and then you get into when they actually go and it's to get the grail, and it's only the penitent man will pass, and all of that is fantastic. So it's not as comedic as I remember it being. You talked about Connery. I mean, he's great. And also I think Harrison Ford, because there's more humor in it, he gets to show more range than I think he does in any of the other movies. And Harrison Ford is one of those guys where he is a, capital M movie star. And I don't think he gets enough credit for, everybody loves Harrison Ford, but I don't think he gets enough credit for being a really good actor, because he's done so many blockbuster films. He's a really good actor. And again, he can do comedy and drama equally well. And like you said with Connery, playing against type, I don't know if he ever played another role like this where he wasn't, super heroic and all of that. I don't know. But
well,
so
have you ever seen The Man Who Would Be King, which is an adaptation of Rudyard Kipling's story, and it's him and Michael Caine?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I don't remember a lot about it.
That's a great performance.
Yeah. It's, you have we've people put down Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and that's a movie I didn't hate. There's problems with it. But just looking at this initial trilogy, they're all great movies, and even this one, there's some bad green screen stuff in this, where I think that's one of the things that makes Raiders so great is, I don't think there's any green screen in that at all, that you can tell, and this movie has quite a bit of green screen, and that makes it, it's not even that it makes it seem dated. The green screen didn't look great in 1989. But it's still a great movie, with even the kind of nitpicks that I have of it. And it's just the cinematography is so great, and the music, and especially that when you get in that ending in the temple or whatever it is, where they're actually going to get the Grail. I mean, all that's just fantastic,
Yeah, I want to. It's not pushing back or disagreeing with you a little bit about the gags, but I think it leans into the comedy pretty hard. You had said that the first one doesn't really have any gags in it, and the first one doesn't have anything like him showing up to the Nazi castle in Tammy, like a tam, and pretending to be a Scottish lord. That's pretty ripe. Stuff. The first one doesn't have that, but the first one is very laced with comic bits. He gets in the back of the plane
and swordsman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And there's a whole basket thing, like Marion hops in a basket, and then there's a sort of a whole sequence of like, which basket is Marion in, and people carrying baskets back and forth and throwing in the back of them, Indy. And there are sequences that, whether or not you want to call them gags in the same way, I think are beloved gags that audiences are like, oh, that was great, where it's the action and it leavens some of the fear. Like when we saw it, we were kids, and if you're a parent there with kids, I think it leavens some of the stuff, like the big Nazi getting chopped up by the propeller blade, and the way that Spielberg builds that, it's you don't see it, but he gets sprayed with blood as and there's a sound as the propeller chops the guy up, and I remember that's burned into my brain.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think it's inappropriate for what were we, like 8 or 9? 10, I don't know how old we were, but
yeah.
I
know second grade, whatever age you are in second grade, 8 or 9.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily inappropriate, but it's effective in a really hard-hitting way. And I think that what this does is it takes the template of the first one and it gives it a big shot of adrenaline, so everything is a little emphasized.
Yeah.
And I think at the time, that was kind of, without being able to articulate it, that was kind of one of my beefs with it. Oh, now we see kid Indiana Jones, and now we got to have Indiana Jones' dad. I mean, when you make a third one, you sort of get away with not expanding the universe too much in a sequel, right? Because they actually went back in time and they did an earlier date. So the Temple of Doom is actually a prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark. So you dodge a bullet a little bit, you learn more about Indy, but you don't really expand the universe that much. It also, that one goes darker. Like, that one is a much scarier film, I think, than Raiders of the Lost Ark. Mm-hmm. But in the third one, when you're returning to form and you're going to add in other generations, I think... even Steven Spielberg's worst movie is a pretty good movie. I mean, the guy knows how to make movies. I think of Steven Spielberg as the Stephen Sondheim of contemporary popular cinema. Like, he almost invented his own genre of tentpole summer blockbuster, right? I mean, Stephen Sondheim came along and completely changed the American musical in theater, and Spielberg kind of did the same. I mean, you can say that of a lot of the people that, George Lucas, obviously there's more than one person, but in terms of consistently and having a style and really delivering, and this combination of action and pathos and romance and comedy, it's I think coming back to this film as an adult, it's just, I just a number of times was shaking my head and being like, Steven Spielberg, man,
Oh yeah,
just such a sure hand and such a clear, clean style and a way of telling a story with the camera. And I think he got amazing performances. He gets amazing performances out of his actors.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you let Sean Connery just be the kind of hard-boiled, tough guy, he can do that and be compelling without looking like he's trying. But in this one, there's that scene when it's been his life work and he reunites with his son and they're comparing notes, and he's Indiana Jones has found the rest of the rubbing, and he figured out the city where the map that Dad has already defined. He just didn't know where it started. And they go through that scene. He's like, "Oh, and you found the thing?" And he says, "Alexandretta, Dad." And he goes, "Alexandretta," and he's so giddy. It is just this wonderful, wonderful scene. I think I have been harder on it when I was a kid. It has aged well.
Yes.
I think it has, to its benefit. I think some of my objections to it, I've grown past those things, and I really just enjoyed. And I think when you look at the trilogy, and we're setting aside Crystal Skull and the new one, which I think we should talk about, which is coming out soon. I think when you look at the bookends of this is a trilogy. It's a great closing movie. Right?
Well, you have that, they literally ride off into the sunset, and it's such a great scene,
And it's called The Last Crusade.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like, we're done. Okay, yeah. I did one, and then they came back to me, and they offered obscene amounts of money for 2 more pictures, and I made 2 more pictures, and this is great, but now I'm going to go do other stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then, of course, how many decades later we get the Crystal Skull that everybody has problems with, and we bring back Marion, and that's really sort of postscript. And I think it's fascinating now that he's agreed to come back and do yet a 5th one,
mm-hmm.
in which they're time traveling apparently, but we're going back to the Nazis. Crystal Skull didn't have anything to do with Nazis. It was communists in the 50s, I guess, right?
Yeah.
In the atomic era.
I guess they figure everybody likes Nazis as villains, So
it seems to kind of anchor the franchise. And they've got Mads, what's his name, Mikkelsen?
Mads Mikkelsen, yeah.
Mikkelsen, he's great. So I think having him as the sort of chief bad Nazi is, I don't know, I'm excited for this one in a way that I don't really remember being excited for Crystal Skull.
I was excited for Crystal Skull. I mean, I was excited. I was excited for it. As far as when
I hope we're kind of past the old guy jokes. Like, I feel like Crystal Skull had a bunch of like, well, it ain't like it used to be, kid. I don't know, whatever. And there was a lot of passing the torch stuff with Shia LaBeouf and family stuff, right? And Shia LaBeouf, it is his son, right? That Marion never told him about, right? Sorry, we're spoiling the entire franchise if you haven't seen it.
I mean, that one's 15 years ago now.
Yeah.
So, when I talked about gags with this, I think kind of more what I meant is like the like when they're driving the car through the tunnel and the Nazi plane is going by and the guy looks over at him. That's
right.
There's nothing as corny as that.
No, you're right.
In Raiders. That said, some of the like the and this was something that I enjoyed the first time around, but I was like you, the initially and again, I was 16 at the time, and I don't know if it's just being a teenager, if it was just me personally, but I was definitely more critical of everything when I was 16.
What? That's great. You astound me, sir.
To like early 20s than I am now, you know what I mean? And now it's just like, I watch a movie and it's like, I enjoyed it, but I'm not going to like argue with people about it, whereas back then I would have. But I lost my train of thought there for just a second. But I think the dynamic between which everybody seemed to love even at the time, the dynamic between him and Sean Connery, it was sort of like, because he's very much the son, you know what I mean? Whereas it's always like, well, this guy's my hero, and now he's like his dad is kind of bosses him around, and you know what I mean. At the time, that I think that really, it kind of took that kind of heroic sheen off of him in my eyes, as a kid. But another thing, talking about Spielberg, and I probably talk about this I probably talked about this with Temple of Doom, I don't know, but every blockbuster movie maybe, but Spielberg, nobody's ever been better than him at blockbuster movies. But one of the things about his blockbuster movies, it bothers me when people say, oh, when you have a really dumb big blockbuster movie and people say, oh, it's just this isn't an Academy Award movie, you're supposed to turn your brain off. And the Spielberg movies were never movies that you turned your brain off, maybe Crystal Skull, people could say that, but you watch this Last Crusade, and there's, it only slows down for a few minutes to have a like the scene where the tank goes over the cliff. I was just
thinking of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And they hug, and it's this great, and he says, I thought I'd lost you, boy,
Yeah.
But then he'll only do that for a second. And then it's like, he's gotta be the like manly father, you know what I mean? Cause he sort of loses it. And then he's like, well, let's go. Why are you just sitting there on the ground? And that's a really great, little touches of emotion. There's this when he.
I think as children we wouldn't have appreciated that, right? I don't think we had the frame of reference on life to appreciate that. But there's a sister scene to that when they're on the Zeppelin and they think they've made it. They think they've snuck out of Germany. Of course, the Nazis turn the Zeppelin around, but they're sitting there with a glass of scotch or bourbon or something. And he said, it's been a long time since we had a quiet drink together, Dad. Mm-hmm. And they're comparing notes, and it turns out that they have both slept with the Nazi femme fatale who was a double agent or posing it, right? But there are these quiet moments, and you're right. You say it's only a couple of minutes. It's not even minutes, really. Mm-hmm. It's maybe a couple of minutes total. But Spielberg bothers to include them because it makes the relationships real, right? And this was a kid who grew up driven by many of the things, he is his father's son, but he has also always felt that, and this comes out in the movie, he always felt that his dad thought his work was more important than his son, right?
And his wife, yeah.
And he gets to say that to his father in this film. And there is the scene when the tank goes over, and I think deep down we know Indiana Jones hasn't died in this movie, right? But we don't see it, and certainly the Sean Connery's character, Indiana Jones's father, does think that he's died, and he says to their other friend there, he says, I never told him. It would have taken 5 minutes, and now I've lost him. And then there's a bit where he has climbed up a different side of the cliff, and he kind of comes and there is a moment where Sean Connery grabs him in an embrace and says, I thought I lost you, boy. But he still can't bring himself to say it. Yeah. And that's what I love the most about that scene is it doesn't really change for Harrison Ford's character. Life doesn't change because his dad never tells him that thing that he things would have only taken 5 minutes to say. And to me, because he can't. Not because his son doesn't deserve it or whatever else, but just because, I don't know, I'm getting emotional because I lost my father recently. And
yeah.
It resonates. So at 50, this movie resonated with me as an adult in a way that I think as a kid it just went completely over my head. And I was like, whatever, okay, crack a whip or chase a Nazi,
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot in this that brings the whole franchise around. You said you don't have to turn your mind off. I think that's absolutely right. I think Spielberg never forgets that a good movie is about the human experience. And that's about the relationships we have and the things we think are important and the things we're willing to risk our life for. in some cases, and in this franchise, it is life and death, right? He doesn't really. I was going to say Steven Spielberg doesn't make science fiction, but of course he has.
Yeah.
To great effect, but it's always human. The wonder of the alien is always built upon the human experience of confronting the unknown, and that's just the basics. But people like Michael Bay, you lose it in that. It's not about the robot that turns into a car. It's about the people who have to interact with the right.
Yeah, well, yeah. If you have a movie that's just special effects and action, and you don't care anything about the people that are in it, you don't care anything about the characters, it's a pretty boring. It's pretty boring.
Why
film.
do you care?
Yeah.
Why do you care? If you can't relate to it, why waste your time on it? I mean, the CGI. I'm not going to go into the analog versus CGI rant, but it's just a pretty thing, and you're like, yeah, but it's 3 hours of this, like,
And Spielberg, as great of a technical director as he is, I'm sitting here trying to think of Spielberg movies that didn't have great characters, and I can't think of.
1942 was kind of a dud.
And that movie bombed, But,
yeah.
And I don't know if I've
with John Belushi. I mean, it's not that you didn't. It just for whatever reason that didn't become the thing he had.
That was Spielberg doing a full-on comedy, which I don't know that he ever really did again. I don't know that he ever did anything that was just straight comedy.
I'd love to hear the behind the scenes on that, and I wonder if he's done interviews about it. But it's almost as though I almost imagine the studio said, Animal House. We got John Belushi. Let's make a rollicking kind of, frat funny that the kids are going to come out to drunk and then that are going to think as a rip-roaring whatever. And the young Spielberg was kind of like, oh, how many million? Okay, or if it was a contractual obligation or I don't know. I have no idea, but it just doesn't soar. Mm-hmm. The way most of his work does. Like even the remake he did of War of the Worlds with...
Oh, I like War of the Worlds a lot.
With Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much in that.
That's a great movie.
There's stuff in that is absolutely terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. I don't remember a lot of the movie, but I'd say there's, 2 handfuls of sequences that, like I say, are burned into the back of my mind that you're just like, oh my God, Mm-hmm.
Another one that would, as things have, we've, because this movie would be, 20 years old now, maybe a little over 20 years old, that would be fun to do on the show, because I haven't seen it since probably it was on HBO or something, is Minority Report.
Oh, yeah.
We
haven't done Minority. We should totally do that. We haven't done that?
No, we haven't done Minority Report.
Yeah, we got to do that. That's a great one.
Because that movie... it'd be interesting to watch that, because like I say, I saw it in the theater, and then when it came out on DVD, I tried to watch it with my parents, and they didn't get it, and I had to turn it off. We were just like, this is weird, and I had to turn it off after about 20 minutes, and that was the last time I think I saw it. But I think with the way the world has changed in the last 20 years, that probably is a movie that's more relevant now.
I think that movie was ahead of its time. I think, with filmmaking and with especially studio filmmaking and big Hollywood filmmaking, timing is such, you make an independent film. It's so much time and energy goes into the making of a film, and it is so much a product of the time in which you make it and the place where everybody on the crew, everybody is in their lives. They bring themselves so fully to this craft, and it's all baked in there to the product. And the films that really stand the test of time touch on kind of universal, resonant human themes. And sometimes you have a piece of popular entertainment that I think, like Minority Report, is ahead of its time. And when it came out, people just weren't feeling it. I don't know how it did in the box office. I don't think it was.
It did 358 million worldwide. It did 132 in the U.S., which, I mean, I'm sure it doesn't say here I'm sure it was a lot, So it probably was viewed as a little bit of a disappointment, I imagine. But
not a flop.
I don't remember exactly. No, not a flop. But
I mean, it's a Tom Cruise movie. I think it probably underperformed according to expectations. It's a thinker.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
surprisingly, and that's the thing. That's my thing of talking about Tom Cruise. That's my thing about Edge of Tomorrow too. Is it's surprisingly it's a thinker like you. We've done Edge of Tomorrow, haven't we? Done Edge? Yeah.
Yes.
If you guys haven't seen Edge of Tomorrow and you're into sci-fi and you don't hate Tom Cruise, that is one of my favorite under-known movies. People have never heard of it. I'm like, it's great. It is a great summer popcorn sci-fi Tom Cruise movie. And I feel like in some ways for several years after that, he was chasing Edge of Tomorrow. And he, did we do Oblivion?
No, we've talked about it, but
we've talked about it. We haven't done Oblivion. I feel like Oblivion was the next year, and that has got some great big crayon problems, but it's still a really interesting movie in many ways. I think the ending kind of kills it. Anyway, we won't do that episode now, but we should probably do Oblivion too.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway, I don't know. I don't know where I was going with all that, but
in summary, Spielberg. I mean, for me, he's the best ever blockbuster director. I don't think anybody's ever gonna match, what he did. But my whole point with this is he never did turn off your brain movies. You had characters, and I think, I don't think Indiana Jones would have stuck with us for 40 years or whatever if it were just nothing but special effects and action. There's plenty of that. I mean, as much as you want,
right.
But they're characters that you love,
Right.
And even the side characters like Solid. We talked about this a little bit off mic or whatever, but they turned Marcus Brody into kind of a clown in this. I don't really know why, but it's not too bad
for comic effect.
Yeah,
for comic. I mean, he wasn't ever really a central character in the other ones. He was definitely memorable, and he was there, but he was part of Indiana Jones's university life. He was the guy that he'd return to with the artifact and be like, well, we did it. Oh, yes, indeed. It was really quite wonderful. But, and he was this charming personality, so I think in some ways they said, and by they I mean Steven Spielberg, was like, how do we bring him more into the story? I do actually like that bit that he does. He's like, he speaks 7 languages. He's got a 2-week head start. He'll vanish. You'll never find him.
He might have the Grail already. And then they just show him, and he's lost in the marketplace.
Bumbling. Does anybody speak English? Yeah, but then he says with his father, he's like, oh, I made that up. Like he doesn't, he got lost in his own museum once.
Yeah, I do love that. And famously, and this was another thing that bothered me as a kid that now I don't really care about. The Temple of Doom, both Lucas and Spielberg were kind of in dark places at the time and made a really dark movie, which I loved as a kid, but it didn't do as well as Raiders, and it didn't do as well as Last Crusade wound up making more money. And Spielberg has always said that Last Crusade was an apology for Temple of Doom, so they purposely went much lighter, which I never felt that there was anything to apologize for with Temple of Doom, but that and Gremlins were the 2 films that that PG-13 came about as a result, because it was like they weren't quite bad enough for an R, but they were too intense for a PG.
But they were scary. You know what I mean? Like they weren't.
Yeah.
If you really went scene for scene, I mean, we've had the conversation of how messed up the ratings board is in terms of sex versus violence. But if you really went scene for scene at the time, you think this isn't really all ages appropriate, and parental guidance is kind of like, Well, as those kids get to 8, 9, 10, 11, you start to, some kids are really mature and ready for it, and some kids aren't, parental guidance. But that PG-13 being like, parental guidance, but there's some stuff, there's some stuff in here. And it isn't so much that you see, sex was always kind of a disqualifier. If there was nudity, it's like, R, it's an R. I saw a breast, that's an R, But with the violence in the themes, language, they could always kind of count, curses, and they'd be like, oh, no, that's an R. You said it 3 times, which I always thought was a little absurd. But with those movies, they were fun and they were accessible, but when they got scary, they got memorably scary. Like, I remember the scary stuff from those movies, and I'm not going to say it scarred me for life, but it made a lasting impression all these years later. Like, there's a ton of my life that didn't make a lasting impression. I can't remember. People are like, oh, remember when we did that thing? I'm like, I have no recollection of that. But I remember some of the scenes of those movies. They're
Mola Ram and Temple of Doom pulling the guy's heart out. That's something you don't ever forget,
That's intense, man. Mm-hmm. That's intense, yeah.
But yeah, as a PG, you could have. Now, I saw all of these movies with my dad, but as a PG, we could have just been dropped off as 10-year-old kids or whatever to watch these. We wouldn't have had to have had parents with us. I don't think he had to have. I think it was. I don't think so. So I don't. Here's a question that I thought of. I know this is probably an impossible question to answer, but both of us, and we're not unique. I feel like everybody we knew was into these movies, and then also the Star Wars movies. So we had 2 trilogies that we grew up with that we were obsessed with. The original Star Wars movies and the original Indiana Jones. If you had to pick a trilogy, do you think you could do it? If you had to pick between the 2?
Like one to take with me to a desert island?
Yeah.
Like if you could only have one of the trilogies?
Because I loved both of them so much. I guess Star Wars was just such a, an expansive universe with so many characters.
What
that
an
I guess you could
question.
Imagine so much else, with, but...
It's interesting because the common thread between those 2 on screen is Harrison Ford.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Lucas and Spielberg work together on both franchises, so it's both of those men's work, but Harrison Ford is the one on-screen through line. At 50, I guess I'd say I'd go the Indiana Jones.
Mm-hmm.
Because as somebody who is now wading in... I'm not waiting. I'm a filmmaker, but it's not what I do professionally. But I love Spielberg's everything we've been talking about. That the idea that you can activate the imagination, but you keep it grounded in the human experience. Like Star Wars to me was predominantly imagination, and it was the actors themselves that. Like Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill, even James Earl Jones, who wasn't there on set, like he did the ADR later, but these performances made it human. Alec Guinness, obviously. I feel like George Lucas is an idea man and a genius in his own way for coming up with these universes. But as we see, it has taken someone like a Jon Favreau to come back and make The Mandalorian and re-anchor it to they're human stories. Like you can't have, the style doesn't do anything without the substance. And that's the kind of running criticism of the prequel films, which is it's all style and there's no substance. The dialogue itself, people don't talk this way. Who cares? Right? It's a love scene between Padme and Anakin Skywalker, and it's like, the sky is so blue here, it makes me feel alone. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, who wrote this?
And you have to wonder if, and I think, didn't Spielberg with what's the third one? I can't even remember what the
I don't. Case in point, I don't know what they're called. Baloney 1, Baloney 2, and Baloney 3.
But I think in the third one, I'm pretty sure that Spielberg actually came in and directed some of the lightsaber battle towards the end. But you have to wonder if Spielberg or if Lucas had turned those movies over to somebody else, had his ideas and everything, and did the same thing as he did with Empire. And because, you have Empire that, as cold as those prequels are, there's lots of humanity in Empire and Jedi too. Jedi's not quite as good, but if Lucas had not directed and taken those films and given them to somebody else,
I think they would have been much less problematic, and I think they would have been much bigger hits. Because, and I am not a screenwriter, but I think you could fix a lot of the problems in those prequels with a red pencil. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, he was clearly a visionary film student, and he had made THX, and he did Star Wars, and they got that through, and that really changed the science fiction game. But the studios didn't give him free rein. They're like, look, kid, you're great, and we're on board, and we're going to make this, and this is going to be great. But you have to change the following 38 things. It's your movie. It's going to be your movie. But Han Solo can't be a weird alien with a scarecrow head or whatever, right? And they need to be people. And you can have the aliens in there, but in this place, and they gave it to a seasoned screenwriter who had multiple awards, and they're like, take a pass at this, and he fixed it. And so there were rails. There was like, great yes to all of that, except all of this, and then you have to change all of this. And he made the movie that they allowed him to make. They gave him a free rein with effects, etc., right? And we see what Star Wars did. It has spawned, it kind of metastasized an entire universe. A new multiverse. There's a whole, universe thing now that became the Star Wars cinematic universe. And that's, whatever criticism you want to level at George Lucas, that's remarkable. That is crazy that he did that. However, I think that if I had to pick, I would go with the Spielberg-driven stuff, because it's fundamentally it's human stories, and I think it's more Harrison Ford forward. And I fell in love with Harrison Ford. Like Harrison Ford's characters, Han Solo. I mean, what kid didn't want to be Luke Skywalker? But
I wanted to be Harrison Ford.
Yeah. But the Harrison Ford roles, those were the ones that you related to. You're like, yeah, he's not perfect, but he's got a good heart, And Indiana Jones is more about that, and I think it's the swashbuckling stuff and the imagination, but it's grounded in this human truth of fallibility and good intentions.
The thing that you said about the good heart, it reminds me of one specific thing that I wanted to mention is in the beginning when it's Joaquin Phoenix and he's, what is it, the Cross of Coronado?
River Phoenix.
Or River Phoenix, yeah. I knew I was going to say Joaquin Phoenix. But the guy that I love the thing where at the very end, the bad guys get the cross back from him. And
you lost this one, kid, but it doesn't mean you have to like it.
Right, and he says you have a good, you've got heart or something like that earlier when they're on the train. But he said, yeah, you lost this one, but it doesn't mean you have to like it.
And I think he gives him his hat, which
he gives him his hat.
Very improbable.
Yeah, but I love that scene because he puts the hat on him, and he leans down, and then they cut to
right. That's a wipe. Yeah.
Yeah, where they cut to, then it's Indiana Jones on the boat, and he lifts his head. I love that transition.
Do you know I have seen that Stetson? I have seen that Stetson in real life. It's at Industrial Light and Magic, and I went to college with Chris Miller and Phil Lord, who have done Into the Spider-Verse, and I'm so proud of this. And he got a job working for them shortly after college, and I was living in San Francisco, and I reconnected with him, and he said, "Oh, you should come out for lunch." And so I went out to Skywalker Ranch to meet Chris for lunch, and he gave me a little walking tour. And we're two kids. I mean, I'm a couple years older than him, and they have display cases with all of this great memorabilia, and the hat is one of them. The Stetson hat that is the Indiana Jones through line, the actual prop. I mean, They must have 30 of those hats, but the one used in the original film is there. And you love it. It's iconic. It's a through line for the character. It becomes the symbol of the character. But that is a great wipe that I think ties it right together with the first two films. Is that, he comes up and he sort of smiles, remembering the Cross of Coronado, and of course he's on this cargo ship where it's the same guy wearing the same suit. It's like, does he only own these white suits, or is this just a crazy coincidence? Like 25, 30 years later, he's wearing the same suit. Anyway, it's movies, and and he blows up the ship, and he ends up getting it back. And
the funny thing is, he like however many people died on that ship,
right? Innocent sail, right? They're not Nazis. You can't, but it's just crew of the ship.
Just like he goes back to that was in Portugal or something, and he goes back to the U.S. and nothing happens or whatever. Yeah. There's another thing that's funny. I mean, they do this in the original in Raiders, where the girls in the class are all kind of swooning over him, but you have the famous thing where the girl closes her eyes and it says she's written "Love You" on her eyelids. So he comes he comes back like from that, and it's like his first class back, and he goes to his office, and there are all these kids outside of his office, like trying to
office hours,
it's girls and it's boys too, but it's just, I just thought it's an archaeology teacher. Right. Are there going to be these kids just like clamoring to see him?
Well, and they have this it's a great bit where he's like, archaeology is 90% of it's done in the library. This is not a swashbuckling adventure. It's not any of that stuff. And X never, ever, ever marks the spot, right?
Yeah.
And of course, in this film, X literally marks the spot. And they highlight it when he breaks into the tomb. But I mean, I think I rolled my eyes at those things when I was a kid, because I wanted Raiders of the Lost Ark again.
Yeah.
And, no filmmaker wants to make the same movie again. They always want to make it something new.
And sadly, with this new one, as excited as both of us are, I mean, it would be impossible at this point, but we're not going to get Raiders of the Lost Ark. I am not expecting this, and did not expect this, but I would really love it if the tone of this last one was very serious, but it's going to be super jokey.
Well, we've seen some clips of it. We've seen some clips of it, and it does look very to form. It's not a rickshaw race, but it's it's through some third world. I don't know where it is,
Yeah.
And we've got Phoebe
Waller-Bridge.
She's great. I mean, I think that the people in it are great, but I think it's a template now. And I think that Harrison Ford is probably more interested in coming back to Indiana Jones than Steven Spielberg seems to be. I mean, I think he feels like... Have you seen his latest one about the family?
Steven Spielberg?
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
I haven't either. And it's look that up for me. Look up what the name of it. It's the somethings. It's like a family name.
Oh, the one that's the like the semi-autobiographical one. No,
everyone I've talked to
the
about
Fabelmans.
Yes, the Fabelmans. Everyone I have not seen it myself. Everyone who's seen it is just like, it is a masterpiece. It's so wonderful. And I feel like I see interviews with Scorsese now too, and he's like, he remembers Kurosawa. They gave him some award when he was 80 or something like that, and Kurosawa saying, "I'm too old, right? I only now realize what cinema can be, and I'm out of time. Like, I can't. it's taken me my whole life to realize what cinema can do and can be, and I don't have any time left to realize, you know? And Scorsese echoed that. He's just like, you know, there's so much to do, and I'm getting too old to do it. And it's like it's a bitter realization. I feel like Spielberg is aging into that too. He's sort of like, look, I don't want to. We've done this. We did this already. I did this, and there's other stuff to. I hope that he brings that to this film, but I think it feels like a property, and I'll watch it, and I think I will enjoy it.
Are you talking about The Fabelmans?
No, The Fabelmans I think is a film it's just.
Oh, you're talking about Indy.
I'm talking about the fifth. I'm talking about the
Where he's
Dial
just
of
a producer
Destiny.
on that, you know, because that's James Mangold, you know, is the I think.
Well, now that's the other thing is I think Mangold is a crackerjack. I think James Mangold can make a terrific movie, and I think that's a smart corporate choice.
Yeah. Right.
So it might be but Mangold is going to feel like he needs to make a lot of homage to the other films. I mean, I think they've got him on a pretty short leash in terms of what it probably has to be.
Yeah, I imagine. I don't as
you know this isn't going to be Logan, right? This is going to be the first one where they say it has to be these 18 things, and he's going to have. That's
a great example. That's kind of what I want is an Indiana Jones version of Logan.
Yeah,
you know, where he dies at the end. You know, I would be fine with that. That's the thing. After all this praise that I've heaped on Spielberg, I think the last Spielberg movie that I was really that interested in, and it wasn't great, was Ready Player One.
Yeah.
Did you ever see that?
Yes, I did a couple of times.
Did you read the book?
No, I have it. I bought it for my son, but I didn't read it.
The book is great.
Well, I'll read it.
But the movie was just okay. You know, I thought. I don't know how you felt, but some of this other stuff that he's done recently, I just haven't. It
was literally all CGI. I mean,
that was the thing.
The whole film is just in this virtual reality, and it's inventive and it's colorful, but I don't know, it disconnects me.
Exactly. Yeah. So, well, let's come around. I mean, I can't imagine either of us not recommending this Indiana Jones movie.
I do. 2 thumbs up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's great. Just and my problems that I have with it now are very, very nitpicky, but it's a great movie.
I think it's a terrific entertainment, but it also runs a little deeper. And I think if you're into filmmaking, it's you can see a lot of Spielberg's mastery. You know, we talk about Wes Anderson and the sort of bespoke love of the whatever, but the style in that opening sequence where he's a kid in I guess it's the 10s or the 20s when he's a kid, and
I think it's 1912 in the movie.
And he's like a scout, and the scout troop is just riding out into the desert, and they're going to go spelunking, and the scout leader's just like, you know, don't stick together. I mean, the kids could die, but it was a different time, and there's this sort of.
Let me interject for 1 second. I was a scout. I was an Eagle Scout, and we went. My scoutmaster was very into spelunking, so we went on some spelunking trips, which were great. And we actually had a kid. There was a kid who was a large kid, and he got stuck in a cave.
Well, that's where I was going. Is this sort of Biff? I used to read the Hardy Boys, and there was always the sort of blonde fat kid with a crew cut and the blue eyes. That's
basically what this kid was exactly like that.
Had the rosy cheeks, and he's a bugler, it's just genius casting, and it goes right to this style. It's an archetype of the time. It's this great homage to the era. He falls off. He's comic relief. I mean, it's kind of cruel, really, but you know, it really nails. It's like, okay, we've done the adventure comics of the 30s and 40s. Let's do what does this genre look like at the turn of the century and the beginning of the 20th century? And they really nail that style too, with the kerchiefs and the kind of Roosevelt, park ranger hats that they were wearing, and the I don't know. I don't know where I started with
Phoenix,
that.
it's hard to not watch the movie and think, wow,
what could he have been?
Yeah, because I mean, when you think about what his brother has gone on to do, and I mean, he was already viewed as a great actor, but I'm River Phoenix I'm talking about, but he was still just kind of starting out, because what was that, probably like mid 90s when he died, something like that.
Yeah.
So he and you wonder if the plan was back then to try to spin these off with him.
Well, and they did it. They did Young Indiana Jones,
They did
right?
Young Indiana Jones, yeah.
It just didn't take off, but I think it might have. But I think this property is so tied to Harrison Ford. I think that was one of the problems with Solo, too, is we just don't... Harrison Ford is a good actor, but he's a movie star.
Yeah.
First. And I think there's something a little... He, without maybe intending, he does that. Like it is, he bakes himself into these roles, and we love him in these roles. And the idea of like, oh, we'll just spin up a thing. This is a young Indiana Jones, and we'll just use another actor. And you're like, it's not going to be the same,
But especially if now people are already predicting, that this, because I guess this one's close to, with everything tied in, like a $300 million budget. This, Indy 5. So people are already saying, it's going to bomb. Crystal Skull made about $800 million, and nobody liked it.
Yeah.
I don't see any way that this doesn't do well, and I don't. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't see any way.
Crystal Skull is entertaining.
Yeah.
I think that we're comparing it to other Indiana Jones films, and you just go, oh, this is definitely a last place fourth. And you're like, yeah, but last place fourth in 4 really entertaining movies. So
sure.
I don't think this will bomb. I'll be surprised if this bombs, but it might not meet the incredible expectations that us and other fans have of it. We'll see.
Yeah, but I think it'll make plenty of money. And
Mangold's a good director.
Yeah. But there's no way, Disney maybe will have enough respect to not make another Indiana Jones movie until after Harrison Ford has died.
Maybe.
But there's no way maybe. But there's no way that they won't that there won't be more Indiana Jones stuff. I just don't, they didn't spend the money to buy, because they didn't just buy Star Wars, they bought Indiana Jones too. They didn't spend the money to just do one movie.
I think to breathe life in it, you have to do what you have to. There has to be something electric, and this part of what made me upset about Chris Miller and Phil Lord being taken off of Solo. You have to let somebody else take the reins, right? You have to give it to fresh blood to take ownership of these properties and make it exciting for a new generation. And I think that The Mandalorian achieved that, right? So if they're going to do it with Indiana Jones, they're going to need to, whether it's Mangold and let him make his own film. You have to take your hands off it a little bit and let new people make it exciting again, make you money. There's going to be some trust. They can't just keep packaging the same old because people don't want to see it.
That's true, but they also can't. Indiana Jones isn't a universe like Star Wars.
That's true.
I don't think
it's a guy.
You can't. Yeah, it's a guy. I don't think you can do the Young Adventures of Sala or Marion or something like that.
No,
and have it work.
Not that they won't do those things.
No, not that they won't do those. Yeah,
but you're right.
I've always argued for animated series. I think you do an animated Indiana Jones series, and then you can have it be whatever era you want. You don't have to worry about age. I never really understood. And started out used to be an animation studio,
right?
But so I don't know.
Well, it's also limited by if you look at it in the nuts and bolts of it. I mean, he is an archaeology professor at this college, and he kind of goes on sabbatical once in a while. He's not always out fighting Nazis. How many times a year does he? Maybe once a year he goes and does this. Otherwise, he's a teacher, right? Mm-hmm. So you can't just be like 6 seasons of 12 episodes of him fighting Nazis. It's like he's not a Nazi fighter. He's an archaeologist. The Nazis just get in the way in a couple of notable occasions, right? So it's a little bit contained, which is why it's so brilliant as a single first movie, and why it's kind of a coup to have made a trilogy out of it. Like, okay, he didn't just have one adventure. He had these 3 adventures. And then you're like, well, no, now he's going to have 5. And you're like, what if he had dozens of adventures? And you're kind of like, oh, come on. I mean, it just doesn't.
Well, and also the thing that you get into with series, and this is, I don't want to get it too far flung, but I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday. So they are Paramount is doing a Friday the 13th series that's going to be like Jason Voorhees when he was a child or whatever. Because the very first Friday the 13th movie is the mother is actually killing, the camp counselors or whatever. And I said to this guy, you are taking 80, 90 minute movies that are very thin characters, and it's just, every 10 minutes you have a guy killing somebody, and you're trying to stretch that out to 10 hours or whatever, 8, 10, 12 hours. And what they do is they fill it in with melodrama, which was never in those movies. And it's the same thing. If you would take Indiana Jones and stretch it out to a 10 episode series or whatever, I guess they did it with Young Indiana Jones. But like you're saying, what are you going to do? Have him long stretches of him in the classroom or whatever? It's like...
Hey, come up with new, pay your writers. Yeah. Compensate your writers. Write new stuff. It's not that there aren't any new ideas, right? It's a failure of imagination on the money side of it. That's the problem.
We talked about Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and she's going to be, and great for her to, because she's going to make a ton of money, but she is writing a Tomb Raider show for Netflix or Amazon, and it's just like
she's not going to do it. She's not a Tomb Raider though.
No, I don't think she's Tomb Raider. I think she's just going to be the showrunner for it. But it's just like, okay, I mean, fine, but I wish that she could get.
But that might actually be interesting.
It might actually be interesting, yeah. But I would rather
two-dimensional property, right? Tomb Raider was never anything except it was an adventure. First person, what do they call it when you're right behind the main character? It's not first person shooter. Is that
third? I think it's third person shooter. Yeah,
but it's basically like you're standing behind Lara Croft as you control her through, Indiana Jonesing her way through whatever. And it was all about those tight cargo shorts, and it was just this animated fanboy babe basically with a pigtail, and it took off like crazy, and it spawned this entire property. It's not interesting. It's TNA Indiana Jones. That's all it is, without any of the interesting human stuff of Indiana Jones. But maybe you give it to a strong female writer with a brain. Maybe she actually creates a character that's interesting to watch.
I mean, I'm sure at this point she can do anything she wants, but I would, and I'm sure she can do both. But I'd rather her do something original like Fleabag.
That was incredible. That was incredible. Anyway, we're at time. We should wrap it up. So yes, we both completely recommend this movie. You should check it out. If you haven't seen it, watch the whole trilogy. It's great. If you're our age,
watch Crystal Skull. I
mean, come on.
I don't think they're fun unwatchable.
Movies. I don't think it's unwatchable either. I went back. Not every sequence is great, but some of them are. Chris and ChrisTalkMovies@gmail.com. That is our handle. We're on the socials. If you would like and subscribe, that makes us happy. Leave us a comment, a suggestion, blah, 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 the whole boilerplate thing. Thank you for watching us on YouTube or listening to us on your podcasts. We love it. That's why we do this. It's not really why we do this. We do this because we like talking to each other about movies.
Yeah.
But we do bother to publish it. What are we doing for next time?
So I think we are going to do another third in a franchise, one that I've never seen before, Alien 3.
Right. Yes, Alien 3. It's been a long time since I've seen that.
And I was reading there are two versions of it, because it's sort of, I mean, we can get into this when we talk about, but sort of famously, this was an early David Fincher movie that there was lots of studio interference. And then I guess he was able to do a director's cut. Which is like 2.5 hours long or something like that. And I was reading a lot of people online saying, "Oh, the director's cut is way better."
Well, we should try and watch that. Oh,
well, that's the thing. I can only find it. We can look again, but I could only find it one place, and it was like $15 to watch it. So I don't think I want to watch it that much. But yeah, but we can look and see if we can find it another place. But what I was able to find on my Roku was just
the
one
original
location. It was like So
all right, we'll do a little research one way or the other. We're going to watch Alien 3 for next time. Join us if that's not too outside of your wheelhouse. And unless you have anything else to add,
we're coming up on. So then our next episode should be our episode 150,
150th episode.
Yeah. So we'll have some kind of a surprise for that. So
something fun.
Yeah. So,
and I enjoy doing this with you.
Oh, me too.
It started as a COVID thing, and man, I'm really digging it.
Me too. 100%.
So on that note, humble listeners, or not so humble, I don't know what I'm talking about. We will talk to you all next week.